Hello, hello, Ruchi.
Hi, Rob. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday again. How are you?
Good, good. It is winding down the end of the month, and I am so excited.
Good, 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 good. It's certainly been crazy. And as I keep sharing with folks, that there is no playbook for this. This is all new. And, part of me is really excited by that. Part of me is terrified by that because, nobody's ever experienced anything like this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say that, Rob, because I think a lot of businesses are starting to believe the kind of like national narrative, which is COVID is waning. We can go back to the way things are. But even if I think about my own office experiences, just got an alert last week that a couple of people tested positive and they're going to close the office down again. Um,
Wow.
and
Wow.
so, what do we do as businesses and as workplaces if we're trying to go back hybrid
Yeah.
um, and continue some kind of sense of semblance of pre 2020? And that's just not possible anymore. So I think it's funny the organizations that are recognizing that this is unprecedented. We've never done this before. Are probably the ones better poised to change than the other ones.
Well, I'm glad we actually started with this topic
Yeah.
because this episode of the Robin Rucci Show is Psychological Safety Part Two. We got such great feedback from all of the folks who have watched it and have responded to it that we're going to do a little bit more. And while we're on that topic, let's just get right to it. What does psychological safety look like in the hybrid environment? Because now, as you just mentioned, people don't want to go back. They do want to go back. They're being forced to go back. When we take the hybrid environment and you take psychological safety and you put it together, where are we?
Yeah. I think the simple answer is hybrid environments don't change the drivers of psychological safety. I
Hmm.
think what changes is that managers have to think about how you're tactically executing to help those drivers. So if we think about one of the primary drivers of psychological safety, is thinking about team members being able to, say, raise concerns.
Yep.
In an in-person environment, you're cultivating a relationship and creating a bond, and oftentimes creating structures that make it easy for someone to pull you aside and offer criticism or raise a concern. In a hybrid environment, when some team might be in person, some team might not be, or where you're in person and then not, it's a lot harder for folks to feel out, when should I raise this concern?
Hmm.
It gets a little bit tricky for folks. And so I think managers really have to think about, where am I creating some pretty intentional space to make sure people can fail, to make sure that I'm talking about failure in a positive way, to make sure that I'm creating relationships, that I am inviting feedback and open dissent. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to ask you about that. I was hoping you'd mention feedback because when you start to think about feedback and coaching and helping each other in a collaborative environment to succeed for the goals of your organization, sometimes it could be tough. And I'm wondering, is there the right forum? Is giving somebody feedback something you should do when you're both virtual? Is it something you should do? You wait, oh, yeah, we'll be in the office next Wednesday. Or is it something that you can do one person's in the office, one person's virtual? How do you think that all is going to work?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what we know about, again, psychological safety, trust, these relationships. It's not so much the medium, it's the core human relationship that is being formed. So I have really, really great trust-based uh, teams and psychologically safe teams
Hmm.
that have been completely hybrid or completely virtual, hybrid, in person, vice versa. And I've also had teams that aren't that way, all in those mediums. The definitive factor for psychological safety, a place where you can give feedback to people and receive feedback openly, is the relationship you cultivate. And so for folks who might not be able to cultivate relationships intentionally, where it's hard for you to do that, you have to work a little harder if you're going to be hybrid and your team members are going to be hybrid or virtual. And you should know that as a manager and a leader.
Yeah.
For me, I actually found it very draining. I'm an extrovert and I'm very, very relationship oriented, but it's very hard for me to be purposeful and intentional about that relationship building in a hybrid environment, I have to actually build in time at the beginning of check-ins. I have to remind myself to release the agenda. I have to really, really work at making sure that I'm creating intentional space in all of our touch points, because you can't waste touch points when you're virtual.
That's
Every
right.
touch point counts.
That's right. So I'll tell you an interesting story very much related to this. I think I've shared with you that we've recently, within the last really actually year and a half, we did a major customized feedback simulation, teaching people the process of giving feedback. And obviously in COVID, it's all been delivered virtually, which has been great because you're able to scale it and so forth. So one of the participants in the follow-up asked the facilitator, who is our client, so let me ask you this, when I'm giving feedback to somebody, should I wait till we're in person? How should I do it? And interesting, the facilitator said, oh, yes. This is a situation where you want to look the person in the eye and you want to be able to have that one-on-one relationship. And all of a sudden, there was an eruption. We had about 40 people in the virtual environment say, no, when you're giving feedback, it's not about being in front of that person. It's about having the trust. It's about having the relationship. And good feedback should transcend the medium, just as you shared. So it was really interesting that that person's mindset was different, but they changed instantly based on feedback, which of course, incidentally enough, was given in a virtual environment.
Well, that's the thing. I think leaders have to do a lot of soul searching in these environments, and we don't have time, right? We're always go, go, go. You want to make sure there's no thorniness in your relationships. You think you'll be able to do it better in person. But in reality, especially for hybrid teams, you really have to take every moment that you can and capitalize on it. And you have to introduce structure as much as you can. I think about, again, so much of psychological safety and trust is like a reliability, a feeling that you're going to be able to do X, Y, Z without any risk of reprisal or retribution. And that necessitates there to be a structure in place so people aren't being reactive. And so I think it really behooves managers and leaders to think about what are the structures I'm putting into place for even myself to dispel myself of this notion that feedback has to be in person.
Yeah. So good. That's exactly where I was kind of thinking this conversation would go. And as part of my preparation for today's episode, I was thinking about situations where, okay, let's play it out. There has been a breakdown of trust. There has been a breakdown of psychological safety. And now as a leader and as even an individual contributor, you've got to rebuild it. And I know for a fact that a number of the people who responded to our last episode asked us the question of, okay, what do we do to get it back? So once it's been broken, are there any rules here? Are there any insights? And so I thought that'd be a really interesting question, because I know you probably have some really good thoughts on this.
Yeah, I look at psychological safety as something that is an ebb and flow anyways. You never win psychological safety. I think I said this last session, you don't ever achieve peak psychological safety and it stays that way. Teams change, circumstances change, people's feelings change. And that means the level of psychological safety you're going to feel, your team's going to feel, is always in flux. And so if you feel like there was some inciting incidents or some kind of time that really eroded the psychological safety on your team, I'd say two things. One is just find out for sure, do the assessment, put in those 7 questions from Amy Edmondson, and do it actually proactively every quarter so you can measure the pulse over time, and you can actually get ahead of anything that might erode it. The second is, I think once you feel like it has dipped dramatically, chances are it hasn't dipped dramatically across the board. And if it has across all 7 behaviors, there's a lot of work you're going to have to do to think about what are the structures we need to put in place that haven't been put in place. What are the attitudes we have to show as leaders that we haven't? If it's just a few behaviors, I think it's really thinking for example, if it's, I don't feel safe to be my true self on this team, or I'm not recognized for my unique skills. There are specific interventions that you can put into place as a leader to really address those failures or those gaps. And my advice would be to do that both authentically, acknowledge that it's a gap and it's a failure point right now, and also do it post haste. Don't wait for it.
Yeah. Be proactive with it. Think it through. One of the articles that I read recently about this topic, especially when psychological safety has broken down and you're rebuilding it, is all about kindness and empathy.
Mm,
And that bringing those two factors back as the foundation really can count, and being kind to one another and really thinking through their feelings, their situation, and how do you restore trust to that situation. Thoughts on that?
yeah, absolutely. Look, I think like kindness and empathy are never going to be at waste in the workplace.
Right. That's
Um,
true. Can you
you
ever
know,
really have too much kindness and empathy, really?
exactly. And I think where people fall down is confusing, say, kindness with, I don't know, permissibility, right? Like you can be
Mhm.
kind, but hold people accountable. You can be empathetic, but also understand that there are still standards to be met and think, how do I help and partner with someone to get there? And so if we're thinking about kindness and empathy, I often frame it in like the idea of what are my assumptions going into an interaction? Are they positive assumptions? Are they giving people the benefit of the doubt? Sometimes people don't deserve the benefit of doubt, actually, right? Like I think sometimes, folks get, and this is very, very true with people of color in the workplace. We often are forced to give benefit of doubt to white counterparts, and we're never afforded the
Right.
same kind of benefit of doubt. So I don't say that to be flip for folks, but I do think that one way to manage volatile emotions and things that get in the way of us being kind is taking a moment and pausing. There's something I like to do, which is like literally just pause, take a breath, be aware of my triggers, really think about how my body is feeling in this moment.
Mhm.
Take like 10 minutes to actually step away if I can. If I can't, take 10 seconds to count backwards and then reframe whatever I'm thinking in that moment. So if it's, I'm so mad this person yelled at me, instead I might reframe it and say, this person might be going through something really frustrating right now. I'm going to
Right.
meet them where they're at.
Right. That's so important. And then that raises another point that I think can probably be our last element of the show today. It has to do with inclusion. And so
Mhm.
you just, as you mentioned that, and it got me thinking about some of the other research that when leaders are truly modeling inclusion and doing it the right way, not because they think it's just the right thing to do, when you do that the right way, you are creating an environment for psychological safety. And again, coming back to my question of how do you rebuild it? Well, one of the things you can do is obviously be kind and be empathetic, but also really be a great leader and be truly inclusive and get people's opinion and create that culture by which people's opinions really truly matter, and that collectively you can build towards your goals and objectives. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think inclusion is very important. I think leaders are not always aware of how to be inclusive, truly inclusive. I think a lot of folks think about if I have a diverse team, I'm already being inclusive. When really inclusion is about opening the space for folks to contribute, making sure that you are recognizing people for their unique contributions,
Yeah.
creating a sense of belonging. And I think one of the things that leaders often benefit from, especially with psychological safety, trust, all of these topics, is vulnerability. We
Mhm.
look at the research from Brené Brown, from Simon Sinek, and we hear about how important vulnerability truly is. And vulnerability isn't being soft or, being an open book. It's really being able to share openly the things that make you you.
Mhm.
Being able to admit failure, being able to let people in without feeling like there's a risk that your leadership is going to be denounced. And there's certain level of psychological safety that necessitates leadership vulnerability and vice versa. You can't have psych safety without vulnerability, but it's hard to be vulnerable if you're not in a psych safe environment.
Yeah.
So often I will tell leaders, if the environment is not such that you feel safe to be vulnerable, think about how you can role model. What is the thing that you can put into place? What are the things you can ask for to keep the environment safe for you to be vulnerable, to show others they can be too?
Yep. And as I was listening to you, I'll say this. I think listening is also something that's really important, and having a culture where the voice stands out and being able to really truly have your active listening, understanding what you
Mm,
are saying, flows well into all the things we've talked about today.
absolutely, absolutely.
Good. Ruchi, as always, it is wonderful to see you. Thank
Same.
you for this. Folks out there, leave us comments. We love them from the last time. We'll continue to have the Rob and Ruchi show, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much,
everybody.
everyone.